So I want to welcome everybody to the January Community of Practice. We've had kind of a break since November, and it's really exciting to be starting up the new year with some great new topics. We have some really interesting speakers for you tonight. And we want to make sure that everybody knows this is an inclusive space, and we really would like to get to know you. So if this is your first meeting that you're joining us, or if you feel relatively new, we'd love to have you just briefly introduce yourself so that we can welcome you. And we look forward to, getting to know you. And this is a place where you can ask questions, receive support, and hopefully be enriched. So I'm going to just open it up. If anybody would like to just tell us a little bit, tell us your name, what organization you're with, and what brings you here tonight.
Hi, I'm Erin Dorham from the Bedford Facilities Department, Municipal Energy and Sustainability Work. And we are working to secure MassEnergize as part of the Bedford climate team.
Great, thank you.
My first meeting. Thank you.
Nice to see you, Erin. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, everyone. I think I came over the summer to one of these meetings, but it's my second time here. My name is Sierra Mall. I work in the Energy and Ratepayer Advocacy Division at the Massachusetts Attorney General's Office. So working on energy bill affordability and energy efficiency, electrification, as well as consumer protection around third-party electric suppliers and solar companies.
Great, thank you. Good to see you, Sierra.
Hi, I'm Jamie Simeone. I'm on the steering committee of Sustainable Sudbury, and I work with my co-volunteers and Fabiani on the plug-in program.
Welcome. Okay, is there anybody else who would like to introduce themselves? And if not, that's perfectly fine. And feel free also if you want to put a note in the chat, just to say who you are and let us know how best to reach you. So, okay, well, thank you. So my name is Nathan Scott. I'm the executive director of MassEnergize. And what we'll do is we have a few announcements and a few things just to talk about. I hope all of you have heard about our upcoming Climate Leaders Conference. So we've got some things to say about that. And we have a few announcements, a few updates, and then we're going to turn it over to our speakers. We have a few speakers from Boston University who are going to be talking about metrics and data. Very, very interesting stuff. And then we have a team from Boston College, and looking forward to having them on and presenting as well. So once again, welcome. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Joe, who's going to take some of the announcements for this evening.
Hi, good evening, everybody. So I just want to talk briefly about our upcoming Community Climate Leaders Conference taking place on April 8th at Bentley University. You may have all seen an announcement that went out earlier today that our early bird ticketing pricing ends Friday this week. So make sure you grab your tickets before Friday at the reduced cost, because after Friday they go up. And Megan and I were working hard on the program for the day. So we're working behind the scenes, but we have some confirmed speakers. They're up on our website. So we have Tom Toro, who is a cartoonist with the New Yorker. He's going to be our keynote speaker. We also have a co-author of a graphic novel who she will be taking the lead on the youth panel this year. And we're hoping to round out the day with a talk on the technology and the future of technology and what hope there is with all the technology that's coming down the pike with a venture capitalist by the name of David Miller. So we're working on the agenda. So stay tuned for more updates to the program and grab your tickets before Friday at the early bird pricing. And we are also, as I said, we're working on the breakouts and all of those, and we would like your input. So we have a quick survey. Do it now, and I'll put it in the email afterwards, and then put it in the chat. It shouldn't take too long, but we've got a selection of breakout topics, and we'd love to know your top 10 out of that list of 20 or so that we can really hone in and focus on what breakouts everybody would most benefit from. So I will drop that in the chat as well, the survey. So I think that's all the conference updates. Megan, did you want to add anything else?
Yes, thank you,
Oh.
Joe. We are working on the breakout sessions, and thank you for answering the survey, because we're really kind of debating about whether we should have 14 breakout sessions that are longer or 21 breakout sessions that are shorter, that are each shorter. So we'd like to see kind of if everybody is happy with, the same 10, 12 breakout sessions, then we know that we could go with 14. And if so, we're looking for your input. Thank you. So the other things we're looking for, we have a bunch of ideas. I have a nice conference planning team that has been helping me and Joe. But we're looking for campaign showcase ideas. And if you've been to the conference, you know that one of the first panels of the day is a campaign showcase. It's a little bit of a speed round. We have 6 people who taught a successful campaign in their community and share it with others. And it's just a 5-minute pitch. And we're looking for some ideas for that. And the other thing we're looking for are any student leaders in your communities who may have been involved on a more activist level than been involved in an activist level. Maybe they helped get something passed at town meeting, or perhaps they've gone to the Board of Health and had something done, or taken a leadership role in their schools to make some kind of change. So if you have any ideas for those 2 groups, I thought since we were meeting tonight, I would try and crowdsource some of those ideas. You can drop them in the chat to me or Joe, or me and Joe directly, or just in the chat in general. It's a great idea. Appreciate your input. One other thing is, many of you know that, moving on from the conference, many of you know that we have a product we call our Social Media Magic, where we're providing Facebook and Instagram content directly to your Facebook and Instagram spaces without needing to get involved, although you can be as involved as you want. But we are looking for a community partner who isn't one of us, who we see 4 or 5 times a week, to maybe offer their opinion and perspective on what it's like to be a community member, and chime in and say, oh yes, that messaging is resonating. Oh yeah, that sounds great. Looking for anybody who'd be willing to work with us 1 hour a week. And I'm thinking that we might do this as like a quarterly commitment. Would you be interested in working with us for like 3 months? And we'll see how it goes. So if you're interested in that, we'd love to hear from you. And those of you who are MassEnergize client communities, I want to be sure that you join our Facebook networking group. If you're on Facebook, love to have you there. It's a chance for everybody to chime in and chat and ask questions of each other without having to go the email route. And people can, it's a group, it's a Facebook group. So if you would like to participate in that, you can find the group at MassEnergize Network. And then it will prompt you to ask to be invited, or you ask to be invited. Yeah. So those are, I think, our announcements. We have a lot of communities who are working on transitioning their WordPress sites, or their sites to WordPress, which is exciting. And we're training people on MailChimp and Plannable and Canva and Facebook, the social media magic. So it's a really exciting time at MassEnergize. We are busy and we hope we're meeting your needs. So if we can be of further support, let us know. And Riha, just give a little wave. She is our community support and program specialist, so she's a big help in your first point of contact for a lot of questions.
Great. Okay, so if you do have questions or comments, please feel free to put them in the chat. We do try to monitor the chat as the evening goes on. If there's questions about the conference, questions about anything that Joe or Megan announced, or you want to offer some feedback, please go ahead and use the chat. So, okay, well, we are going to start with our first 2 speakers. I'm going to have them introduce themselves in terms of what they are going to be presenting about, because they know their topics far better than I can. But Natalia and Emily are from the CELT program, at Boston University, and they're going to be talking to us about some of the data tools that they've been working on that overlap with some of the data work that MassEnergize and MCAN and others have been working on. So take it away, Natalia and Emily.
Thank you. Thank you for having us, first of all. My name is Emily Ryan. I'm an associate professor in mechanical engineering at Boston University, also an associate director at the Institute for Global Sustainability, and the lead on the CELT program. I couldn't fit that all into my name. And I'm going to present to you today about the data, but I'll let Natalia introduce herself first. Some of you may have met her. She's our wonderful program manager who does a lot of outreach to communities. Natalia, do you want to say a word?
Of course, thank you, Emily, and thanks everyone and to MassEnergize for having us. So excited to get the chance to present our initiative here. As Emily mentioned, CELT is a partnership that works supporting municipalities in their clean energy projects. We will tell you more about it in a second. I'm the program manager. I'm based at the Boston University Institute for Global Sustainability, and happy to be a point of contact for any questions or feedback that you want to provide.
Great. So let me share my slides, and I'll say Natalia will probably throw into the chat some contact information for us if you need to or are looking to get a hold of us. Okay, so I'm going to give you a brief overview of what CELT is and what we're doing at Boston University, and we're hoping to have time for comments and questions and feedback. So please, think of questions as I go along. I'll try and make this quick so we can be interactive. So CELT, it stands for Clean Energy and Environment Legacy Transition. And this is a partnership between Boston University, the University of Massachusetts Lowell, and the state of Massachusetts who funds this work. And we are working specifically at BU on data-driven solutions, and that's what we want to talk to you about today. So just a little history, I won't go into it too deeply, but this program started about a year and a half ago now, and as I said, it's funded by the Healey-Driscoll administration, and this came out of some work going on looking at what's happening in Ireland on decarbonization. And so what we work on here at CELT is three main areas. We've got data for decision making, which will be the focus of the day. We also directly support municipalities and state agencies using I'm going to get out of presentation mode because that's going to keep skipping for me. I didn't do that on purpose. I'm sorry about that. This will allow me to change the slides when I want to. So data for decision making, we're going to focus on that today. We also work directly with municipalities, and I see quite a few in the room that have either worked with us or are about to work with us through the fellowship program that we have, which offers students, graduate and undergraduates from multiple universities across the state to work directly with cities and towns and also state agencies on projects looking at clean energy transitions. And then the final thing is we're collaborating with UMass Lowell and HEAT, which is a nonprofit working on network geothermal, trying to come up with a geothermal roadmap for the state. So today we're going to focus on the data. As I said, that's the thing we do here at BU. And we're really looking at this for multiple different angles. So we're looking at developing innovative data projects to help municipalities and agencies in their decision making. And so when I say that, we're not looking at developing new data per se. What we're doing is working with publicly available data and seeing how we can bring it together to help with decision making and planning as you guys all look at different energy transition projects. And then on the flip side of that, how can we help to look at how successful those projects are using data? So that's the first thing, and I'll talk to you about some data tools we've developed. We're also directly supporting state agencies. So we work directly with a number of the offices trying to see what we can do to help them, either working with different working groups that they have, providing them with fellows, or providing them directly with data tools. And then finally, as I've already mentioned, it's not just state agencies, it's municipalities. So we're working with a number of cities and towns across the state, also with different regional organizations, trying to see what we can do to assist them with their clean energy transitions, either through the fellowship program, as I mentioned, or directly through developing data for them, visualizations, and other things. So we have two main data products that we're working on. We've got the Energy Transition Atlas, which I'm going to tell you about today. That launched, I want to say, almost 6 months ago now, and it's available for use. I'll have a link in a moment. And then we also have the Energy Explorer, which is another tool that's going to be launched in about a week, actually a week, in about a month or two in early spring. So the atlas. That's what I'm going to talk about here. The atlas is a GIS-based tool, so it's maps, which are focused on several different categories. You can see on this slide here, where we've taken, as I said, publicly available data. What does that mean? It can be federal level data, state level data, whatever data is available to us that we've brought together and kind of categorized into these different categories and have produced visualizations to look at different things across the state. So to give you some examples of that, and I'll note that QR code in the corner, that would take you directly to the atlas. And Natalia, you can throw into the chat the URL if you want to check this out. So here's an example. Oh yeah, and I have another URL there too. Here's an example of what you can look at. As I showed you, there's a number of different categories, and within each of those categories, there's different maps that we can look at. So here what we're looking at is actually the Green Communities program, which I'm sure many of you are involved with or are aware of. And this is just trying to show how money has been allocated through that program over time. So that's from 2010 until 2025 per capita. And you can kind of see the distribution. Why did we do this? Partly because we work directly with green communities and kind of answering questions of how well they're doing, reaching out to communities and distributing their funds. But also it can be a valuable tool to municipalities if you want to understand how you're doing compared to other towns and cities. And there's other ways you can visualize that. If you see on the left-hand side, there's different links to different maps. We also do things
It'd
like
be a little bit better if we
Yes.
could see the full screen.
You want the
Emily,
full-
do you want me to share the presentation and see if it works on my side?
No, I
think
can do
that
the full screen. I can make that work. Here, that's better to look at anyway. Thanks, Fred. It's just it has some sort of automatic advance that we've never turned off that's gonna advance for me, like that. But that's fine. So there's green communities, as I just mentioned. And then there's also, and these are just a couple of samples. There's a lot more data in there. And you can look at other things like climate leaders as well on that kind of state programming map. We have things about energy burden. So you can see this housing energy cost. So the average annual housing energy cost across the community. And again, we try and be pretty clear about where this data is coming from and the times it's looking at. So we look at various data. We've worked a lot with the LIHEAP data. We've got a bunch of work going on. I should have mentioned at the beginning, I don't do all this work by myself. That should have been one of the first things I said. We have a number of faculty and students that work on this. In particular, Cutler Cleveland's done quite a bit of work on LIHEAP. He's a faculty member in Earth and Environment at BU. Another example for you is installed solar, right? So looking at how towns are doing with their installed solar across the state. So this one's installed solar capacity as of up till January of 2025. And there's other, if you look again along the left-hand side on the web, if you go to the actual website, you're able to look at other things as well in terms of energy infrastructure. I think this is the last one I've got. More on energy infrastructure. Thinking about thermal peaker power plants. This was one that was discussed with the state. There's the Office of Energy Transitions as they're looking at things related to getting rid of liquefied natural gas or getting rid of peaker power plants. They've asked us to do things like visualize where those are, and then we can actually layer data on top, which I should have probably included as well, showing something along the lines of vulnerable communities and how they align with where these peaker power plants are to understand how it impacts the local communities. So that's the Energy Atlas. I just gave you a very brief kind of view of a couple of the plots that you can look at, but you can dive in as much as you'd like. There's many more data sets that are involved in there, and if you start to click around on it, you can see that you can get specific numbers for different communities, so you can see what your community is doing. The other tool that I mentioned that will be coming out, I think probably mid-March is what we're looking at, is called the Energy Explorer. And this is complementary to the Energy Atlas that I was just showing you. It's not GIS based, so it's not based on graphical maps. It has a number of different compelling visualizations trying to give you ideas about trends over time, also information on communities, but case studies, etc. So to give you an example, this is a plot looking at fuel use, the share of energy consumption in the electric grid for Massachusetts from 1960 to 2023, so basically up till now. Looking at this data, you can see really clear trends such as the dominance of oil and coal back through the 80s and 90s. And then as natural gas has come about in the last 10 to 20 years, the increase in natural gas that we've used here in Massachusetts, at the same time bringing down things like the coal and the oil. And other data we've got coming out with the Explorer include things like energy prices. So looking at our abysmal energy prices in the state and how that's changed over time, looking at not just the average, but also things like residential, commercial, industrial. So as I was saying a moment ago, the Atlas is GIS based, meaning it's map based, whereas the Explorer has got a little bit more options in terms of how we look at things either over time or in other ways. But we'll also include some of the kind of GIS type data. As I mentioned, we've worked a lot with LIHEAP, which is the Low Income Heating Program data, trying to understand what benefits we've had in Massachusetts municipalities. Okay. I know I went through that very quick because I want to ensure that we have a few minutes for some questions and some feedback from all of you. You will get the recording of this all, as Nathan was saying. But in case you would like to get in touch with us, you can see here we've got our email addresses, our LinkedIn, etc. So I did good because I was told I have probably another 10 minutes, which I wanted to make sure I left for questions. I'm going to stop sharing so I can see everybody. But I'd love to open the floor to questions or comments that you all have. I'm sure you're not a shy group, so if you don't have questions, I can offer some questions I have for all of you. But I'm going to open it for a moment to see if there's general thoughts or feedback you'd like to ask first. And
Yeah.
so polite, raising your hand. Megan, I see Megan's hand is raised.
Can you describe some use cases that you think we might want to use the information for?
Yes, and actually that reminds me of something I wanted to mention that I'll ask now of your thoughts on it. So we've got like I said, the GIS data that Atlas is out and available for anyone who wants to use it. One of the things we've gotten feedback from people is, and especially I see a lot of cities and towns represented here, is quite honestly, you don't care about the whole state, you care about yourselves. And so one of the things we're developing, which will be coming out pretty soon, is basically a report that takes all of the data we have across all those maps. I'll pick for Medfield since you're from Medfield, and you can get a report telling you exactly where you guys stand and maybe how it relates to the average for that, whether it's solar installations or, infrastructure in your community. So that's one way we're looking at it. What else did I want to say? Oh, do I have another hand? Natalia, I feel like I'm blanking on what the rest of the question was, but if you have anything to add, you always can jump in.
Sure. Megan, we have identified different use cases for the Atlas, and of course, we're working on figuring out those for the Explorer, because the idea is that they complement each other and offer like a general picture of the state of clean energy across the state. But in the case of the Atlas, we have found like very specific points in which municipalities can use them. The possibility of finding the information about how each municipality is doing and how it compares to the region or the neighbors has been something that is very relevant in terms of understanding like what is going on and how the dynamics play at some neighboring municipalities to some extent. The other point is that it definitely seems to be a good benchmark where municipalities can identify what other cities or towns are doing and ask additional questions about their projects and what they are implementing to advance certain projects in a certain way. So that's also a way in which the Atlas can be used. And when the Explorer is public, you're going to see more connections there, because we also want to highlight case studies and a little bit of the trends and the stories behind the implementation of these projects.
Thank you.
I see Karen has her hand raised as well.
Yeah, so 3 questions for you, actually. First of all, does the data include mass save data? Because at the community level, it's been awfully hard for us to get mass save data.
Mm-hmm.
So it does.
Yes, it does. Yep.
Okay. And then kind of talking about the community level, like some of us on this call are municipal people, but many of us, and some of us may have a role on a municipal committee, but others of us are more uh, community activists who work with our town, but also maybe push our towns a bit. So I wonder, I mean, I feel often the need for data, and I just wonder how you see this atlas and the Explorer helping community activists versus municipal people. And also the third question is the data placed in the context of Massachusetts state climate goals? So that, like, when we're talking with people at the community level, we can say, yeah, we have all these EVs, but, you know, in order to meet the 2030 goal, this needs to happen.
Okay. Yes. Okay. So yes, we do use the mass save data. That was the easy one. In terms of the data that we produce, one of the things we've really tried to do, and we're trying to hold ourselves to here, is that often we'll have somebody ask us for data, whether that's a state agency or a specific town. And one thing we say is if we have the data for them, we have it for all of them. And so whatever data we generate, we're trying to make sure we generate it across the board so that it's equitably, it's available to all. The second thing is this is open to anyone who wants to use it. So it's not restricted for users. It's wide open. The Energy Explorer that's about to come out might be useful as well for that, because part of what we can care about, and Cutler Cleveland, the professor I mentioned that's also involved in this, he's very into visualizations. How do we visualize data so that others can use it? And I think I would guess one thing you'd say is that getting that data that's accessible to all and not just accessible to somebody that's really deep in the weeds, but can clearly see how your town is behaving or how this would benefit, et cetera, is really what we're going for. So I'm hoping that'll be helpful to not just towns and cities employees, but to the wider community. And then the last one was about some of the climate action plan and how we're doing in relation to meeting goals. That's part of that report that we're thinking about. So it's not as simple as saying you have 10 EVs, you need 100 more, but trying to put it into that context is exactly what we're doing with kind of these town reports of where do you stand in comparison to others, and then although it's constantly moving targets and changing rules, but like how do you fit into the bigger picture of hitting the goals?
Thank you.
Great.
Fascinating.
Okay, so I don't want to take up too much time. I got at least two more hands up. I don't know who raised their hand first, but I see Mike first in my screen.
Hi, Emily. Thank you so much for this. So MassEnergize has a really interesting kind of double entendre in its name, because it's Mass as in Massachusetts, but it's also Mass as in like everybody. So I think Vermont continues to be the only non-Massachusetts organization that's part of this particular enterprise. And I'm kind of curious to know to what extent you talk to other states in thinking about the architecture and infrastructure and data that's available. And in particular, being selfish, as you say, people tend to be. Like, have you spoken with anybody in Vermont about what you're doing? Because I think a lot of what you're doing would be very interesting to us in Vermont, thinking about like, how do we use the data that we have lying around to do the sorts of things that you're proposing?
Absolutely. So unfortunately, being Boston University and being funded by the state of Massachusetts, we are focused on Massachusetts right now. And so we've been really working at gathering and collecting that data. But we're not coming at this blindly. There's a lot of faculty at BU that have been working for a long time with different types of data in terms of climate and health and energy infrastructure, et cetera. And so we're pretty well versed in it. And we are very interested in seeing what we can do for surrounding communities, meaning New Hampshire, Maine, Vermont, et cetera, because I think there's a lot of similar goals between the states and New England. And if the data is available, we're happy to work with it. We are not funded at the moment to look at that data in Vermont, but we're more than happy to talk to people about how we can expand the work we're doing.
That's great. And we might be able to actually find some funding. Like we're not necessarily interested in like starting from scratch. So that'd be great. Let's talk.
And the infrastructure we have, you feed the data in and we can pretty easily spin it up, right? It's not starting from scratch.
Yeah. Exactly. Thanks.
Do we have time for one more question? Because I see Brad's been patiently waiting.
Yeah, sure. Let's take Brad's question and then we'll move on.
Thanks.
I'm interested in whether you were aware of this a data tool that we are been working with this professor at Bentley.
Zaina, yep.
Zena. So you know her, and she's done emissions calculations for all towns in the States. And I don't know how accurate, but they kind of follow the MAPC prescription, I guess. Might be interesting to merge that into your tool.
Yes, we do know Zaina Cranmer. She's a professor at Bentley, as you mentioned. I'm sure I think many of you are familiar with her work. And we are currently talking about how can we collaborate. And actually, her and I are going to start working with a student jointly this semester. So we are in line with that. We think she's doing great work. Yeah. Easy question.
Good.
I'll pass it back to you, Nate. I think Natalia put all of our contact. Please reach out. We'd love to talk to you, and we'd love to help you if we can.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thank you. And thanks to, BU and CELT, the CELT initiative, for making all of your work, available and accessible. And thanks for joining us tonight. So, okay, well, we're gonna move on. We do now we're moving from Boston University to Boston College. And we've got a team who are going to be talking about communication. Some of you have heard Professor Greg Sparkman, who is actually with us tonight as well, but he and his lab have been doing really, really interesting work that we at MassEnergize have benefited from and continue to benefit from. So Anna and Greg, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. I guess I'll just start sharing my screen and then start the talk. Sorry. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Great. Hi, everyone. Before I begin even introducing myself, I should preface this by saying that I'm based in India right now for this month, and it's 6 a.m. here. So if I'm loopy, I apologize. Like, I've caffeinated myself as much as possible, but I don't think it's going to beat the bouts of sleep that I'm feeling right now. So please bear with me. I might just be a little bit slower, but we'll get through it. And I'm Anandita Sabharwal. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at Boston College at the Social Influence and Social Change Lab that's directed by Professor Greg Sparkman, who's also on this call. And I'm going to present some research, a large portion of which is done with Greg. And I go by Anna, so please feel free to refer to me as Anna. Okay, so well, as I said, I'm going to present some research on how we can communicate about climate solutions, especially when the going gets rough, when climate action seems difficult or frictionful to take, right? Okay, so on this call, we may come from different sectors of work, but I think one thing that a lot of us share is that we want people to adopt climate solutions as quickly as possible. These could involve things like switching to EVs or installing heat pumps and so on. And to persuade large numbers of people to take these actions, we have to communicate with them. And I'm already hearing chatter from today's meeting about the different ways that we can communicate. So this might be through blog posts, through newsletters. I heard some fun stuff on the MailChimp and social media with MassEnergize, and texts, of course. And so there are various forms of communicating people to try to persuade them. And psychology tells us that how we communicate matters, specifically who a message comes from or who's the messenger, and what the content of that message is really important for how persuasive that message ends up being in convincing people to take the desired action. So let's see an example of a recent message trying to convince people to get heat pumps. And here we'll find those communicative elements really easily. And I'll play this video. If you can't hear it, please just shout out and let me know. But hopefully it should go smoothly.
Yeah, I had gas for years. Oh, that came out wrong.
We got a heat pump.
We did.
It's lovely, doing your bit for the environment.
Hey, that's proper toasty like.
And with the grant, we saved several thousand.
Did we? Where'd that go then?
I don't know.
Feel all warm and fuzzy inside with a £7,500 government grant towards your heat pump at gov.uk/heatpumps.
Okay, so as you can see, this was a video trying to convince UK citizens or UK residents to get heat pumps, and
Yeah, I had gas for
sorry.
years.
And the source of this message was very clear. The government was clearly stating that it was from them. So that was the messenger. And the content of this message had some various elements that communication studies would tell us are important. So it focused on this feel-good factor of, getting this heat pump, literally calling it warm and fuzzy. Also talked about the incentive, which was the £7,500 grant. And then by showcasing these different testimonials from different types of people, it tried to tell us that there might be a norm in our community, that more people are, adopting these, and many people who might be like us are adopting heat pumps, right? And of course, there are several other such messages trying to motivate various environmental actions. And so a part of our lab's research looks into how we can devise impactful messaging to motivate large-scale environmental action. And specifically, we look at this in high friction moments. So when action might be opposed by important actors and we might feel powerless as a result, or when action might feel personally costly to people and therefore they might not be too eager to take that action, right? So those are the moments that we're trying to design communications for. And so today I'm going to summarize some of this research on the who and what of communication, essentially. So first, let's look at who the most influential and trusted messengers are when it comes to environmental action. Now we know that when thinking about deciding whether to act on climate change, people take cues from others. Of course, Greg himself shows that social norms are really important. So what fellow citizens and peers are doing impacts people's decisions. Similarly, research finds that scientific experts and their consensus influences people's attitudes and their actions. But when it comes to complex issues like climate change and complex decisions within those issues, people rarely receive signals from any one entity in isolation. Instead, they tend to encounter information on what various entities like scientists, the public, powerful actors in government, as well as industry are saying or doing on the issue. And what complicates this picture even further is that these signals might not always align on a shared message. So some stakeholders might endorse climate action, others might oppose it, and even others may not have a very clear stance, right? So the case of EVs provides a ripe example for this. Many climate scientists agree that switching to EVs is an impactful climate action that people can take, and a large number of Americans either own or are willing to consider EVs. In fact, that number reaches 51% of Americans. But in sharp contrast to this, governments and industry stakeholders seem to be sending the opposite signal, right? So recent policies have reduced incentives for EVs, and private companies have scaled back production. But of course, motivating people to act on climate change and take these behaviors is critical, especially when they receive such mixed signals. And so in our work, we wanted to understand how people make decisions in such complex informational environments when receiving multiple converging or diverging signals from these different messengers. And I'm not going to go into the details of the experiments, but we conducted a series of experiments on US adults, and we tested this question for different issues like people's preferences for EVs, plant-based proteins, as well as climate policies. Okay, so let's get into it. Who is the most influential messenger? Well, we find that when an option is endorsed by scientific experts, people are 22% more likely to choose it compared to when it's not endorsed by scientific experts. Closely following that is the influence of public consensus. So public consensus increases the likelihood that people choose something by 17%. And then government bodies and private companies tend to have a much lower influence, increasing the likelihood of choice by 9% and 7%. So what this tells us is that scientific experts and public consensus have the greatest independent influence. They make for good messengers. And this has been used in communication previously as well. But what if this endorsement from experts and the public comes in opposition from government bodies and private companies who seem more powerful and whose inaction seems demotivating to individuals, right? So we modeled this exact scenario in our experiments where both government and industry stakeholders opposed a climate solution and found that in such cases of what we call systemic opposition, joint endorsement from scientists and public consensus was still able to convince 80% of people to choose a certain option. But when this was isolated, so when people only knew about scientists' endorsement or only public's endorsement, that number fell to 40%. So it was really about the joint endorsement that was able to increase choice in the case of systemic opposition. And this pattern held across the various issues we tested. We also tested people's donation to nonprofits, as well as their social media engagement with energy appliance related content. And so that gives us a resounding answer from at least our research that the joint endorsement from scientists and public consensus are most motivating and are even able to counteract government and industry opposition, which might be a hurdle that we might be increasingly facing in today's time. Now, the next question, of course, becomes, we know who the messengers should be. What should be communicated to drive costly environmental action, right? Which comes with personal costs for people. Now, we asked this question in a large study where we compared 8 psychologically informed messaging strategies to motivate people's personally costly environmental action. And I will very briefly summarize what these different strategies looked like. So a binding morals frame would essentially say that climate change is damaging something that's sacred and calls for restoring the purity of the environment. A collective efficacy frame talks about the power of citizens when they act together. An outcome efficacy frame talks about the action and how it has been the action in question and how it has been successful in achieving desired goals. So, for example, if we're talking about heat pumps, then there are concrete evidence of how they reduce emissions and lower energy costs. And then the reducing psychological distance frame tries to make the negative consequences of inaction real and relevant to people personally. So it's in the air they breathe and the conditions where they personally live in. A future generations thinking asks people to think about future generations when taking actions. A social norms frame, of course, tells people that more and more people are beginning to take that action. Then we also looked at an anger and hope frame, since emotions play such an important role in the climate crisis. So talking about how climate inaction is frustrating, but there's still hope for meaningful progress. And then finally, this warm and fuzzy feeling, right? So contributing to climate solutions has this feel-good factor. It brings pride and a sense of shared purpose. And these might be remnants of these messages you might have seen in various forms of communication that you've come across or probably designed yourself as well. But we wanted to test all of them in a single context to see, well, which one is most effective. And we tested this in the context of people's willingness to pay and support congestion pricing in New York and Washington, D.C. Now, given that congestion pricing is a toll that people have to pay to drive into congestion zones, it imposes a tangible personal cost on individuals. So even though this is a policy decision, we think that what we found here, which I'm going to tell you soon, also speaks to people's willingness to pay for other costly actions like purchasing energy efficient appliances, for example, right? So of the 8 strategies, we found that the outcome efficacy approach, which highlighted congestion pricing's success in achieving concrete goals, like reducing pollutions, reducing noise complaints, lowering emissions, this was the most effective strategy in motivating willingness. And specifically, all 8 messages that we tested were successful, but the outcome efficacy approach led to the highest gains in policy support of 16%. And the other 2 interventions that closely followed that was psychological distance reduction, so making the consequences of inaction personally relevant, and then also making people think about how their actions have consequences for future generations. Those 2 were also incredibly successful, but as you can see, all of the other strategies also moved people in terms of their support for the policy. So what this tells us that when it comes to what should the content of our communication be, the outcome efficacy of a solution, so its success in achieving concrete and desirable goals, tends to be a very effective strategy, at least in our research. And putting it all together, we started with these 2 questions about communication. who should be saying it and what should be said. And we talked about how this might impact persuasion. And answering these questions can help us maximize the impact of our messaging, such as the warm and fuzzy example, on people's environmental action. And here we find that scientific experts and public consensus together make really powerful messengers. So if I was to somehow give an advice for the warm and fuzzy people, I would say, maybe add some scientific and public endorsement to your message. And communicating the proven effectiveness of an action, for example, heat pumps in the warm and fuzzy example, would have also greatly increased people's willingness to take that action. And in other research, in fact, we find that informational narrative approaches like the warm and fuzzy example, which just tell people information in a narrative format, but they don't really make people engage or, write out something or, respond something. Those make for really good ways of messaging. They're scalable, effective, and they're not really less effective than more active forms of engagement. And so with that, I will, conclude once again with the same message, that messages about the effectiveness of climate solutions communicated jointly by scientists and public would be my best guess for motivating environmental action, even in the face of friction like systemic opposition and high personal costs. And of course, I'll thank Professor Greg Sparkman for all of his, advice and collaboration, and then also my collaborator Danielle Goldward on the second project that I presented. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. That was fascinating. So I'd love to open it up for questions. But thank you for the work you're doing and for that great presentation. Okay. Yeah, Fred.
First of all, 2 brilliant presentations tonight. Oh my gosh, the 25 of us that showed up, we've got a lot of work to do to carry these this amazing work forward and spread it. And MassEnergize, thank you so much for doing this. So Anna, I don't know what you'd be like if it wasn't the middle of the night there for you, because you were so spot on. You didn't miss a beat. Oh my gosh, everything was said so well. All right, so here's my particular question for you. It sounds to me as though your conclusion is humans can be, or tend to be, or 80% of them tend to be looking like rational actors. Oh my goodness, how can this be? We've been told the opposite.
Well, I do think that, like rational forms of communication, like telling people something is effective, is clearly effective, and tends to be more than the other emotion-based strategies we tested. But I think the public consensus messaging itself, of course, it has a rational component, because if many people around me are doing something, there must be some kind of collective wisdom. But there is also this conformity element to it, right? So if you build enough of social norms or pressure of like, oh, it looks like, many people around me endorse this, I don't want to miss that bandwagon. So there might be that other, not irrational, but non-purely rational reasoning for why public consensus specifically is effective. So yeah, I would say humans are a mix of rational and persuaded by other means as well.
And I can add one thought on that too. Some of those numbers, the 80%, like how to think about that. Those specifically come out of studies where people are like making a choice between 2 things, right? So in that scenario, it's like which of 2 EVs sounds more appealing to you, right? And so it's like shifting selection in those cases. I think in a scenario where people can just walk away, those numbers look different, right? So nonetheless, that first tool is useful to like discern like which factors would be most persuasive, right? But I don't want people to walk away thinking like, all I got to do is say that like, oh yeah, scientists and the public like it, and then 80% of people will just roll over and do it. Not so easy. But of the messages we looked at, those ones, relatively speaking, are some of the most persuasive. Yeah.
Okay, Sierra.
Hi, yeah, thank you so much for your presentation. It was really interesting. I do some communications work, so it really got me thinking. One thing I was wondering is, for communicating outcome efficacy, what recommendations do you have to do that effectively without, running into information overload or making it too data heavy or too fact heavy? Like, how can you make it so that the general audience can understand the outcomes that you're describing?
Yeah, I think that's such a great question, and something that we were shocked by why the outcome efficacy message was so effective. And in fact, now we found it across different policies as well, even though we presented literally excerpts of like graphs from the New York Times talking about congestion pricing. So we're like, this seems kind of way more boring than like a hope message or an anger message. But I think as long as those effects are tailored to what people care about, I think that's going to get them motivated and engaged to the message. So I think congestion pricing provides a very good example because it's congestion is something that New Yorkers feel. They clearly have been frustrated with it for many years. And so when you talk about the taking away that frustration and that being the effect, I think that resonates with people quite a bit. And I would also say that these messages were presented not really in a dry, cut and dry, like a newspaper clipping or anything like that. It was still a narrative format. So it still started with, there's been congestion and there's been air pollution and so on. So like setting the scene, then talking about what the policy has been able to achieve. So still taking a more narrative approach to communicating those statistics. But it seems like people just like really care about whether something is effective if they want to do it, which would be pretty obvious on the flip side. Yeah.
And I can also add to that too that in real world scenarios, people don't always have the time to fully evaluate an argument, right? Like a lot of communications are just like you driving by a billboard or something, right? So I think, some of the efficacy-based messaging is great when you have an attentive audience who cares about something. Some of what we saw on a present today are complementary forms of messaging, right? So merely illustrating that like a lot of people do this or this is growing in popularity over time, that if you only have like a second to say something to somebody, that's like a decent heuristic to be like, it's probably not terrible then, right? If you have more time, then maybe you can really invest in that explanation of the effectiveness of something. But in the absence of that sustained attention or the time to do that, etc., you might pivot towards, sort of like, hey, scientists and the public both like this. It's just like a quick and dirty message that can be persuasive for those in a hurry too. So I think some of the things we're hearing today are probably complementary forms of communication that you could try for the right kind of moment you're in.
Yeah,
and sorry, just to
Okay, go ahead.
just to quickly add to that, I think the complementary part is so important also because these might be different types of decisions, right? So if someone is trying to like buy an EV, they're going to do their research, and what should come up in their research is probably outcome efficacy because they care, and it's a consequential and a time, like a decision that has taken time. Whereas if you're trying to get people to engage in the moment, maybe you don't have time to, communicate that outcome efficacy, or it's probably not going to be as effective. So definitely like pick your poison based on the goal as well.
That's really interesting. Thank you. Yeah, it's making me think of just the increasing conversation that Massachusetts and residents are having about rising energy bills, and how that might be our equivalent of New York City congestion and how the public is upset about it.
Yeah, good. Karen.
Yeah, I this is really fascinating. Thank you. I could, it gets me thinking in a lot of different areas. But what I want to ask is, has this research been done? Like the people you polled seem to come a lot from the Northeast or, DC area. And I just wonder, do you find in terms of the faith in scientists and public adoption, I mean, do you find that people are responding the same way, say, in northern Michigan or Oklahoma? Because I have family and friends out there who don't, they have a different narrative.
Yeah, of course. I think that's a great question. I'll quickly give the boring statistics answer, and then Greg, please feel free to jump in to add more insight into it. But that research is done on a nationally representative sample. So it comes it's not geographically representative. We don't know exactly which states, but it's representative in terms of political ideology, as well as age, as well as gender. And so in that way, I think I would have quite a bit of faith that that this pattern is present, at least across the political spectrum. So we don't see differences along party lines, which is something we were also amazed by. But it might also speak to the point about even for people who are a little more skeptical of science, when you look at the relative importance of messengers, scientists probably still tend to be the more reliable ones compared to maybe private companies or government bodies. At least that's my hunch. But Greg, would you like to add anything?
I think that, who people consider an expert is also a little complicated, right? So now when we presented it, we didn't just say experts generically. We gave like, oh, such and such. Do you want to give some examples, Anna, that were used to stimuli?
Yeah, so like the Society of Engineering Scientists or something. I mean, I'm sleepy, so I can't include the exact example, but it's like literal expert scientist for that domain. So for EVs, it would be automotive engineer societies or something
So
like that. Yeah.
so we were still pretty specific, and yeah, we cut up the data to look at Democrats and Republicans, to look at it a few different ways, and like the pattern was pretty robust, which was, I think, we expected like a little more variation in it. Um, but not as much as you might expect. Now, the tricky thing I think in the real world is, while those two entities, your perception of public consensus and your perception of experts might be the most influential, rarely do you just get perfect access to what scientists really think or what the public on average thinks. Instead, you get this weird chewed up and digested version from media and television, that actively select and filter which experts you hear from and what you think the public thinks based off of what's on the news, right? And so those groups might be the most influential, but they're usually not the most salient and visible and accessible to the public. So that's obviously a practical challenge. So I think this reflects, that talk shouldn't make it seem like everything's going to be easy. That talk, instead, I think the way I would take it if I was a practitioner is, okay, so we kind of know what we need to say, but being able to be louder than those other groups is going to be hard. And having them not ostensibly co-opt what it seems like experts think is a challenge, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the
Yeah.
two things that I'm taking away from this are I feel more hopeful knowing that this is speaking across, all these different categories of people, but also that that voices don't always get heard. Like the like science funding being renewed, but we don't know about it. So you feel like science is being cut, or that scientists aren't still active in voicing their whole career worth of investigation. They're still out there, but they feel like they've been made invisible because we don't hear about them. So
Yeah, one last caveat is, while the samples were balanced on those demographic dimensions, as Anna mentioned, I would say that the people who sign up for them, you don't get nearly as many of the ultra right-wing folks in those spaces. So there's like a 10 to 20% chunk of people that I would not necessarily expect these results to generalize to. But honestly, I don't think you're probably trying to persuade them anyways.
actually, in my case, I am.
Oh, you are in some cases?
Well,
Yeah,
they're my son-in-law.
yeah. I think that is a challenge. And in those cases, like figuring out who the trusted messenger is and who they consider to be expert, but then still taking away the broader point, like people like you think this is a good idea. Experts you consider to be an expert think this is a good idea. So norms about people like them, etc., still probably a good strategy. Yeah. And then obviously everyone wants to not make dumb choices. So that sense of efficacy of whatever they're doing is still going to resonate at least somewhat. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, we'll take one more question. Mike Roy.
So thank you so much for this. This is really, really interesting. I'm curious about whether or not your work has involved looking at sort of what are often described as like professional decision makers. So I'm thinking about people who are making government policy at the municipal and state level. I'm not gonna mention the federal level because it's hopeless. Um, and whether or not this kind of work applies to how folks who are deciding about building codes, who are deciding about decisions about what sorts of vehicles to purchase, or corporate entities that are making policy decisions within their corporations about energy choices, and if this would apply there, or if there's other different methods we might use. So I think a number of us in this community are both like doing retail work, trying to convince our fellow citizens to do the right thing, but we're also working with our municipal governments and our state level governments to try to help them create policy. And I'm just wondering, the people who are making these policy decisions or making purchasing decisions at within a commercial environment or a municipal environment or a state environment for that matter, do these things apply as well, or is there a different rubric we should be considering?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Greg, you've done some work with those groups. Do you want to take this one or?
Sure. Um, so there's some evidence, but you rarely get the opportunity to include senators in your survey experiments as much as I would like to. But sometimes we have done local policymakers in some of our studies. They're usually not focused on persuasion because people who collect those samples don't want you to be persuading local policymakers, because then the whole method blows up and goes away. So you're really limited in what you can do. What I can say that we've seen is that some of the findings we have in other domains, like say perceptions of what societal norms are or misperceptions of what those norms are, like how the public feels, often are shared by local level policymakers. So at least some of the kinds of thinking looks the same. I'll also say anecdotally, and maybe some of you can relate to this, when I've been in collaborations or talking to field partners, either in industry or government, I get asked a lot of the same kinds of things. So I'll be asked like let's say I'm pitching like a communications intervention to a policymaker or an office that policymaker has, and then I'll often get asked, "Hey, do other cities do this too?" And what they're asking you is, hey, is this the norm among other policymakers like me? Right? That's like effectively what that question is, right? So yeah, sometimes the results kind of look the same in terms of what's influential for those entities and those bodies. They care what other cities like them do, or maybe ones that are like them but a little bit nicer, or something. You know what I mean? Like there's a very specific referent group that they care tremendously about, probably. I think that the efficacy point Anna made, I think, is still going to matter to them. Now, obviously, they have a much more complex set of goals and things. Like they're not only trying to have a solution that works, but they're trying to satisfy a variety of complex stakeholders and things. So I'm sure there's more factors than might be there in the standard population pool. But I think that there should be a decent overlap in some of the findings we have here. Yeah.
Okay. Any more questions for either Anna or Greg? Okay.
I mean, I'm just going to push
Sure.
back a little bit to say that at the policy level, like what impacts individual citizens, what you're saying resonates. However, there's a huge amount of impact from like decisions that are made within corporations and within governments, that they are in fact huge emitters. And if you look at how greenhouse gas emissions are generated, like that is a huge impact. And so trying to get into the heads of the folks who are deciding like what kind of snowplow we should buy or how should we heat the gym, all of those things are really matter as well. And so I think, I mean, maybe I'm suggesting another research project to sort of say like there are important decisions being made by people who are not, I don't think, making decisions necessarily the same way that you're suggesting, because I think they have other forces acting on them.
Massively, yeah. I think the other thing too that is often influential from lobbyists and the like is that they'll try to persuade you that something's popular that's not, right? They'll like you'll live in this bubble where you don't necessarily get to see what public consensus is, or you'll live in a bubble where you don't actually know what the true scientific answer is, right? And so, in some way, I think they're actually captaining a lot of the persuasive messages that we do. I'm sure some of it's literally just quid pro quo type stuff, but I think they're also thinking um, that something might actually be popular. They're kind of like hoping, because it aligns with their interests, whatever those are. So I think that those groups are actually effective doing what we're suggesting. They're just more effective than the truth is in some ways. Though I don't want to, I'm sure some of it they'll do it and they know it's not popular. You know what I mean, right? But there's certain breaking points with those things too. And in the least, I think they hope that it could be perceived as not totally unpopular, right? Like they have to meet some kind of a criteria. So I think that they rest on that. And when it comes to like some of the other research I've done is on social norm misperception, and there's widely shared sometimes norm misperceptions about how much Americans are concerned about climate change, how much they want those policies. And so when that's the case, it's really easy for lobbyists to make the argument like Americans don't really want that anyways. Right. And so I think there's a hard work to be done to make that evidently not true. But yes, if I get more opportunities to study actually how people in policy and government make decisions and can do experiments with a persuasive bend, I would love to. But it's, as you can imagine, not the easiest participant pool to get a hold of.
Yeah, Megan.
Just one more quick question to just bring it down to the practical level for me. Scientific experts, right, and public consensus in a single message, in two messages, in alternating messages. What's your recommendation?
Well, I mean, I think the single message approach, so scientific consensus or public consensus, have both independently been effective, and there's tons of evidence for that. I think what we're finding here is that when they come together, so in potentially a single message, that might be able to even counteract the scenario that we have around here, which I can't speak too much to because I'm not an American citizen. But so given the systemic opposition to certain, important solutions, I think bringing those two together and communicating that joint consensus could be an effective strategy. And in fact, we find that to be the case even in a digital field study we ran on Facebook. So looking at ads that talked about both scientists and the public endorsing certain energy appliances, but governments and industry opposing it, that message was quite highly engaged with compared to the opposite order. Greg, would you like to add anything or?
Yeah, they were many of the ways we operate, many of the ways that we tested it were like either they were like right back to back or just kind of woven together as one message. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you both very much, Anna and Greg, for the presentation, for the fascinating work you're doing, and thank you so much for joining us. We have about 15 minutes left, and this is usually a time where we just open the floor for people's questions, comments. You can ask questions of each other, share a little bit about what's going on in your community, any successes or challenges that you're having. So I really want to encourage people to, speak from the experience in your community. How are you doing? What challenges are you facing? And love to tap the wisdom of your peers. And that's really what we hope this community of practice can be, a community of peers where we are all helping each other figure things out, celebrating our successes and supporting, challenges. So happy to have anybody, raise your hand or just speak out if you have a question, comment, or if you want to share anything that you feel particularly proud that's going well in your community. Megan.
Okay, only because nobody else said anything. I have something from the fall that I didn't get a chance to share, but I'd be happy to. Um, and I think I just located it. So I'll share my screen. And it is something we did, which was really fun. It was called Medfield's Scarecrow Spooktacular, which was just an event with scarecrows in it. And it was for kids, it was for little kids. And I always go to these events and I have a big agenda and I want to get people signed up for this and tell them all about this and that. And this time we just backed off and we just went to have fun with the kids. And it was a really rewarding experience without a lot of agenda. And it just made it a lot of fun. So I have some pictures. Let's see. Um, oh, these were the past couple years. And we'd done, basic boring tables with things and displays and come look at our house. And it was fine. Those were fine. So we decided to do something new. We just focused on the kids. And then we connected with this, enabled us to connect with young parents, which is something we have a tarot, it's not so easy to connect with young parents. But we became a fortune teller as it was Halloween. So we set up a fortune teller booth, which was fun. And we made these little, we dressed up. And we made little, sometimes you call them cootie catchers or fortune tellers. And they had different, things for the kids. Would you like to be, what's your favorite fall thing? Candy, apples, ghost, pumpkin. And then do you like to, compost, preserve water, have clean air? We got them to pick something else. And then inside there was a fun fortune, which is like, you will be a hero to the earth and, you will have a friend who likes animals, something like that. So it was just really sweet. We did 3 different versions on different colors. I suggest using options with odd numbers of letters, like when you spell horse, right? You're going to end up with a different option. If you spell cake, you're going to end up with the same options. Anyway, something you like about the fall, something you can do to care for the earth, something you care about, and then the answer. So it was a lot of fun. And it was really a nice break from the basic booth of trying to get people to sign up for your newsletter list and everything. And we did some of that and we met some nice moms and everything, but it was really a pleasant day. So I just thought I would throw that out there as something that was nice that happened to us in the fall.
Thank you, Megan. That was great.
That's such an awesome idea, so creative. So we're doing something really traditional. We're doing a book club in January. We're calling it the Biosphere Book Club. And it's not about clean energy, but it's about climate. It's the book Is a River Alive, which looks a lot at the rights of nature arguments. But I'm so excited because we already have 5 people signed up, and everybody on the Energize team said no one will sign up. Nobody reads books anymore. So I'm happy.
I'll just say that I'm one of the people who signed up because I got the book for Christmas. Sorry, yeah, for Christmas. So I'm already reading it, and I saw that Energize Acton is holding a book group about a book that I'm already reading, and I'm like, sign me up. So Karen, I'm excited to join you.
You know why I decided to do it? Because I got the book for Christmas too, and I want to read this anyhow.
Right.
I'll share some good news from the Attorney General's office. We just released our winter newsletter, and so we have some good information in there about winter heating bills, gas prices, and we plan to kind of launch these twice a year in the winter and in the spring. So in the spring when electric bills are about to go up, and in the winter when gas bills usually go up. So I'll put it in the chat, and it's the first one ever because I was just hired this year to be an engagement, education, and outreach arm of our Energy and Ratepayer Advocacy Division. So any feedback is welcome, and I'll drop a feedback link in the chat too.
Sierra, are you also a speaker on that issue?
I can speak to what I know if you have any specific questions.
Well,
I'm still learning.
We're going to put you on the list for future talks.
Yeah. I've done presentations on how to understand your energy bill, kind of breaking down both electric and gas bills line by line, and then also some presentations on third-party electric suppliers and utility scams. But happy to chat more if you want to do other things too, or anything related to people's energy bills and accessing resources and heating help. Happy to talk about and present on.
Thank you.
Anybody else who has a question or something to share or a challenge? Maybe we can crowdsource some responses or some support for people who are having challenges in your community.
Can I just mention one other thing? You know, in Acton we do sort of these home of the month clean energy home tour things, but we're doing one on March 1st, and it's the first person I know of who's actually installed solar shingles. So anyhow, I'm excited about that. A new technology. This fellow is just unstoppable.
Anybody who's joining us, relatively recently, do you have a question that you want to ask the others?
I'm curious what people's experiences have been with third-party electric suppliers, either yourselves or community members, like where you have seen them, maybe they're outside of grocery stores or outside of sports events. Anyone who's trying to sell an electric supply product that's not the utility company or your city's community choice or municipal aggregation program, and if there have been any like particularly aggressive tactics or anything that we should have on our radar.
Sierra, I haven't seen like a public presence, but I know a couple years ago we were doing door to door at multifamily buildings in Acton, and there were a number of seniors who were on just outrageous third-party electricity plans. So it felt like they might have been, I didn't ask specifically, but it seemed like they got phone calls or some kind of, individual communications that convinced them to do it.
Yeah, that it's really frustrating and unfortunate. I think sometimes it's phone calls, like you mentioned, or door to door. Sometimes people will come in and impersonate a utility company and ask to see their bill so they can check up on something. And then sometimes they'll be able to see the account number on that person's bill and they can switch them over without them knowing about it. And so that's when we see people who have just been unaware that they've been paying for a third-party electric supplier.
I kind of thought that was all in the past, but it's not. It's still going on.
It is very much active and happening, yeah, unfortunately.
And is there a difference, like the communities that have community choice aggregation programs, do they have a better success rate of having people avoid them or not?
I think it depends on if the municipal aggregation is an opt-in or an opt-out. Because people, I think it just people will switch to the municipal aggregation plan if it becomes an opt-out program. But if they're still having to choose into it, then they might just not realize that they're on a third-party plan, and then therefore they wouldn't think to maybe opt into municipal aggregation. We have some reports that we put out every year if you want to look up specifically your own municipality and see what the impacts of competitive supply are. So I'll drop that in the chat too.
We bought our house in Waltham about 3 years ago, and I feel like every 2 weeks or so I get a call from a random group trying, you know what I mean, trying some, like they don't usually say who they are at first, and they go like, have you seen the message from your utility company about this? And it's like ambiguous, you know what I mean? Like they kind of are trying to worm their way in, it seems like, in those chats. And like I always am like, please take me off this list. And I don't think they do.
Yeah, you can call your utility company directly and ask to get on their no switch list, and this can block your account from being switched over to alternative electric supplier without your knowledge. But of course, it's a little tricky as people switch to municipal aggregation, because if you have a supply block on your account, it'll also block you from being switched to municipal aggregation.
Yeah, the thing is like my name's not even the one on the utility, it's my wife's. But since I'm on, I think the first name of the on the deed or whatever, I think that's how they find it. So I don't even think they're using that info. They're using some other, you know what I mean, other web scraped info to reach people probably. I have a question for you all, but I don't want to deter from other things. You might be wondering, earlier people mentioned the back and forth they've seen about people being like, oh my God, the cost of electricity is so high, and right, and people reeling from seeing that, which is compounded by other affordability crises fronts people are experiencing in their lives too, right? And I know I see on online forums, things like Reddit and stuff like that, where, you know, people like there's such an attempt to figure out what to attribute this to and what's to blame, right? There's so much back and forth within that discourse space. Is this something that MassEnergize or other groups are like actively kind of in the trenches trying to win that discourse battle about, like, because some people obviously want to blame it on, you know, mass save, right? And other people are like, you know, that's only like a small wedge and every dollar spent there actually technically saves, you know what I mean? Like, but like, so there's like a lot of that going on. And I was just wondering if people have thoughts about that. And I'm sure that what we're experiencing in Massachusetts right now is already starting to happen in the rest of the country. It's something I've been thinking about, maybe our lab should do research on, because that discourse battle is such a big deal for like the sort of energy future, right? As we've seen in many in an election, when people are desperate and up against the wall, they'll choose potentially really bad things, right? So I think, you know, figuring out how to win that dialogue space seems, and just being like, if you want a cheaper energy, you just need to ramp up renewables. You know what I mean? Like it's nobody's business, and start citing things, right? But I think that's not intuitive to people necessarily, right? They might actually attribute, once they start seeing more renewables, they might start misattributing the rising cost to those renewables, right? So that the potential for confusion is so possible for the average American. I don't know, is that something that you think our lab should do research on? I'm just asking you all as practitioners. Does that seem like an important thing we should try studying, how to combat that and make sure that the right message gets out there? Yeah.
Yeah, I see a couple of people saying yes, but any other thoughts that, I mean, from other folks, is that what Greg's proposing? Would we like to see more information on that?
Does anybody have ideas about what they think works well in
You know, I would be curious. I know heat pumps have gone, people in Maine have gone crazy for heat pumps. And I know it's a slightly different energy market there because there's a lot more oil in Maine compared to Massachusetts and natural gas. But I'd be really curious to know if like the messaging there has made a difference. And you know what people there are saying about like especially electricity costs and you know switching to heat pumps. And then the whole thing about wind energy. I mean, wind energy was really significant in December, and then you know a new executive order shutting down, um, you know, Massachusetts wind power. Um, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of really yeah, it's a really cool thing. Like the energy market is complicated. How do you create a climate where the public wants to be educated?
Yeah. Or a message that just cuts through somehow. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, the idea that you have to like maintain both gas and electricity, it's like that's two infrastructures you have to maintain just to keep your house warm potentially. You know what I mean? Like
And the
make
future of gas costs, I mean, you know, maintaining that gas infrastructure is going to become more and more expensive.
right, yeah. Yeah, so it seems like
So if I
it seems like
may,
there's yeah.
so you're hitting on some great stuff here, Greg. Yes, there's been many hours of uh, conversation, shall we say, about this. And what occurs to me, since you're bringing it up, what would be a cool study, and is if it's almost a journalism project. Who exactly is forwarding these debates, shall we say, or this messaging about affordability? You know, affordability has been a theme amongst this community forever. from day one. It always is, always will be. However, there's a lot of weaponization going on here, and it can be pointing towards a kind of outcome that works contrary to climate solutions. In other words, if factors came in and forced and offset gas prices with money that was geared towards renewables, that's sort of going in the wrong direction, unfortunately. So I would love to see somebody dig deep and to try to figure out who is instigating these supposed conversations and towards what end, and who's benefiting. I don't profess to have the answers, but I think it's a very good question.
Yeah, no doubt there's a mix of kind of astroturfing by fossil fuel folks and maybe some naturally occurring people being upset, right? It's not hard to stir that kind of thing up with a little bit of instigation, right? In those kind of online or real world conversation spaces. One thought I have about it is like it's a complicated issue and people, they can't really get to the bottom of it themselves, right? The average Joe or whatever, right? So they're ultimately going to rely on somebody else to trust to tell them what's really happening. And I think one of the best ways to cut through that, if you're not winning it there, if you can get somebody an immediate, tangible benefit that's just like quick, easy, and intuitive, right? Like I think when I was really relieved, not just financially, but from a psychologist perspective, to see the heat pump energy rate introduction, because I was like, there's so many people who maybe were like myself, were like, oh yeah, the Mass Save program, that sounds great. Let's switch over. We bought this house a few years ago. We had oil, we got it swapped, and then uh there's a month where we had like a $700 bill. You know what I mean? And we didn't keep it that warm in the house. I've since been like chasing down every corner to figure out what I can do better for insulation and whatnot. But and I'm totally on board for just about anything, right? But if I wasn't that person, like that would be something that'd be hard for me to make sense of, right? So
it doesn't matter which person you are. It's that heat pump bump
yeah
is a shocker to everyone, and it's something that we all struggle to take into account in all this work.
So I think really giving those kind of immediate tangible rewards is massive in terms of persuasion, right?
Yeah.
People need to see it. They need to see it soon. And if you can, if there's some long-term project that isn't going to have that, you need to tether short-term benefits to it somehow to persuade them usually to do the long-term good thing. You need the sugar in the medicine. You know what I mean? Like I think that's my quick take on it. Sorry, other folks can weigh in.
Yeah. Well, Hilly, you've got something to say or share?
I actually wanted to,
Sarah.
yeah, I wanted to respond to Greg. Exactly what you're just saying with the little bit of sugar and the long term and the short term. I'm finding there's a cohort that I come across quite often, and those are older people who would like to have a heat pump or have a heat pump, and probably the next step for them would be to invest in solar. And they're saying, well, I don't know how long I'm going to be in this house. I don't know if this is worth it. And I would love to see some research showing how home purchases, the next young cohort of buyers are willing to pay extra for a home that has certain features, climate features, heat pump, solar, insulation, whatever. That would be a really powerful argument to move that cohort to say, if you invest in this, you're actually gonna be able to sell your house more easily, at a better price or whatever.
Incidentally, I do have a study where we were comparing images of the same home with and without solar panels photoshopped on top of it to see like how it affects perceptions of the home and the prior homeowners and things like that. One of the interesting findings is that people didn't necessarily think the house was more attractive when they saw it with a solar panel on it, versus people who saw the same house but without the solar panel. But they did intuit that the house was probably worth a little bit more. And usually it was weird, like their numbers, the wisdom of the masses on average kind of worked out such that the estimate was about the cost of a solar install. like weirdly enough, the average came out. So like people it seems like perceived there to be like, oh yeah, that probably costs a little bit, and that might be a factor in their mind about how much the house costs. But I think the aesthetic hurdle is still there, and something to think about. Yeah.
Okay, I think we'll take one more question. Sarah Hannah, you had a question or a comment.
Yeah, I guess it's not so much a question as a comment. My husband and I just this fall converted our home from oil heat to heat pumps, and it was a very complicated process. We live in an older home, and we had tried to get solar panels, and it's a gabley house, and we have shade, and it was a whole thing. It's really been like pulling teeth, and we just got our first big whomping electric bill with the heat pump. And yeah, it was a shock in when you see this bill and it's like twice what we've been paying, but you do have to keep in mind we're not paying for oil anymore.
Yeah.
So I think that's one thing. And I think I'm hoping that as more people put heat pumps in, we don't have gas on our street. So our electric bill was for everything except for the oil. And now it's for everything. And at least in our situation, as more people do this, there ought to be able to generate data saying, here are these people, it was all electric except heat. Now it's all electric. What's the difference? And because we asked that question in the planning phase, and we got answers all over the place of basically, well, we don't really know exactly. And I get that every home is different, but I do hope that as more people convert, some enterprising grad student somewhere will start keeping track of this. So that's all I had to say about that.
Yeah, I think you raise an interesting point, which is the most basic comparison you see from the homeowner standpoint is the prior month, the month that turns on, maybe you look at last year, right?
Yep.
Those are like the two counterfactuals. And people often
Yep.
judge things not in absolute terms, but in relative terms to
Yep.
whatever they're used to. If you can instead make that counterfactual for them, what the total cost might have been otherwise,
Yeah.
maintenance, materials, everything else included, and that number is
Yeah.
not as sweet, right? You can
Yeah.
imagine that being in the bill, being like, here's, if you still had to maintain your old furnace plus this plus that, here's our estimate, right?
Yeah.
And then now,
And
right?
plus, I think a lot of people are in our situation. We never had air conditioning except for a couple window air conditioners in a couple rooms. So
Yeah.
yeah, we're going to pay a little more in the summer, but as somebody who does not tolerate heat well, I am looking forward to having that option. But I just feel like in terms of the messaging for people, really to get them to, don't just look at your electric bill, number one. And number two, the system has been improved. I mean, rooms that were cold, the room I'm sitting in now
Yeah, the
is a
comfort.
converted exterior porch that got converted before we bought the house in 1982. So it's exposed top, bottom, and two sides. It's always been difficult to heat. It is so much more comfortable than it used to be. So there's a lot of I guess I'll call them kind of soft factors of yeah, the heat. It's a new system, and it is better. We had the pipes. They do this spray thing where they seal up a lot of cracks in some of the old ductwork and just a lot of different things. And yeah, it was a nuisance. It was expensive and so on and so forth. It was confusing and difficult, but it's great now that it's up and running. So,
The the bundling for like, they do the insulation right before the heat pump is actually kind of wise because then you can't necessarily discern where the benefits come from,
mm-hmm.
which is actually good for heat pump
Yeah,
persuasion,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so yeah, but I think you're right, getting that counterfactual, ideally like in the bill somehow, right? Where it's
yeah,
like, this might seem high, but just know, if you added this all together,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. We have had a really, really rich conversation. Thanks again to Anna and Greg for your presentation and stimulating all of this great conversation. Everybody knows we have a monthly community of practice. We look forward to seeing you next month. Our next month's practice will be on February 9th. So it's the second Monday of the month. and you'll undoubtedly get an invitation, but please do join us. Come with your questions, come with your ideas, and we look forward to seeing you then. But thank you all for being here tonight.